So welcome. Thanks, Steve. Thanks to Centre for the opportunity to speak. I've been told that the time delays were strictly down to me, and therefore I have to be as quick as possible. I'll try and give a bit of context and a bit of technology, so almost as if this were planned, following on from that introduction. I guess from our point of view, so Centre for Continuous Manufacturing Crystallisation, we do not have an explicit focus within our programme around sustainability. It's perhaps more implicit in what we do. And so hopefully what you get from this presentation are some of the areas where perhaps from this community who are explicitly concerned with some of the challenges around delivering and achieving industrial sustainability, how what you're doing can help us to deliver that in this particular sector and area. I'll say a little bit about the centre and its composition in a moment. We work quite heavily with pharmaceutical industry, looking at pharmaceutical manufacturing, and just looking through the literature, pharma seems to be, pretty engaged with sustainability and associated agendas. A whole host of things, monitoring API emissions, pharmaceuticals in the environment being an ongoing issue, but also minimising energy consumption and associated activities, so Bayer reducing energy consumption in their global data storage centres, through to Pfizer introducing wind turbines to contribute to the energy being consumed on their sites. So there's a very diverse range of activities going on, right through to Janssen or Johnson & Johnson's strategic plan looking at their entire supply chain. I've just highlighted some of the bullet points from that plan in terms of the range of activities that they're looking to drive forward. So there's a lot of activity. I think this is one of the areas where pharmaceutical industry is making a lot of progress. But explicitly, we're looking at the manufacturing aspect and some of the challenges that the pharmaceutical industry is facing. This slide here is just showing outputs from a seminar that we co-hosted with the MIT Novartis Centre in Boston earlier this year, bringing together the international manufacturing community and some of the leading manufacturing research centres in this area, together with regulators as well in this area. But this quote on the right-hand side is just taken from the introductory white paper. So there's a series of white papers making recommendations for what industry needs to do in order to accelerate the adoption of these new technologies. But by way of context, industry's gone over the patent cliff. The market is changing. There's not going to be the same number of large blockbusters, so one molecule, huge numbers of patients, large volumes, many more smaller niche products. R&D productivity is down. So is the current configuration of the industry and the supply chain actually fit for purpose moving forward? So there's a big focus within pharma globally in terms of reassessing the current manufacturing infrastructure, particularly based on batch manufacturing approaches, and continuous is seen as a key tool moving forward. So a number of anticipated benefits to be obtained by the adoption of continuous manufacturing. Reduction in costs, greater control, so particularly getting more consistent product quality, impacts on sustainability, reduction of waste, reworking and so forth. Greater responsiveness, again, even there's a big agenda around access to medicines in developing economies, but even in the Western economies, if you look at, say, FDA websites, you will see the number of drug shortages that often arise. And how do we actually address the technological challenges of delivering better performing products? So a range of challenges, expectations on the benefits, but there are not yet any complete solutions across the technical aspects of the manufacturing chain. So our centre's concerned with continuous synthesis through particle formation isolation through to production of the final dosage form. But our focus is very much on the formation of the particles and their characteristics. So the process is continuous processing to deliver enhanced control of the particle attributes. And also an emphasis on the supply chain and the impact of adoption of these new technologies. What impact will that have on the supply chain configuration? So we've got, at the moment, 7 universities, partners in the centre, 3 Tier 1 founding industrial members, GSK, AstraZeneca and Novartis, and a range of technology companies that we work with. So why particles and crystallisation? It's ubiquitous in many chemical operations, as it's fundamentally a very powerful purification technique. But we're looking for a crystallisation process to deliver a whole host of different attributes. Purity being typically essential for pharmaceutical processes, but there are a range of other particle attributes, the crystal form, the size, shape, yield, and so on. So these are not independent responses, but if we can manage to get better ways of controlling that through rational design, real-time control, then we can deliver enhanced consistency. And that starts to feed into getting the product right first time, reduced reworking, rescheduling during manufacturing. So that's what we can do if we get it right. If we get it wrong, perhaps one of the most famous examples was from Abbott in the late 90s, an HIV treatment that despite the fact it had been on the market for nearly 2.5 years, a new crystal form appeared unexpectedly in the manufacturing process. It was more stable thermodynamically, less soluble, and therefore less bioavailable. It had a lower therapeutic effect. So they had to withdraw the entire product and reformulate before remarketing. So there's also a big commercial impact and also a massive impact on the patients who are actually receiving that treatment and were being well catered for by it. So the notion of crystallisation being a sort of facile process, just mix stuff together. You've all grown copper sulfate crystals in primary school. I personally did it in the Cub Scouts. They don't allow us to play with copper sulfate anymore, but you know, it's quite easy to do. But in terms of getting the exquisite degree of control that's required by advanced processes and products, there are some big challenges to overcome. For continuous, again, other issues that we can encounter where we lose control over the particle size. So the picture on the left where we've got lots of fine particles in amongst the crystals can deliver problems downstream, long filtration or variable filtration times. In the middle, you see this white crust on the inside of the reactor. There's a tubular reactor system. And after extended operation, we start to lose control of the system as we get uncontrolled deposition of material. On the right-hand side, this is a probe that we're using to monitor changes in concentration. And we see the build-up of material on the surface of that. So again, we lose control of the process. We are then blinded in terms of what's happening in the process. So it's not particularly uncommon for having problems with crystallization, and it doesn't just affect continuous processing. There's not that many good information sources collating problems in the literature. This article from Powder Technology, looking at examples from Japanese industrial crystallization examples, a whole range of different types of crystallization, not just from solution, but from the melt vapor phase as well. What are the sources of the types of problems? Quality of crystals, accounting for a large number of problems. And then a range of issues highlighted in terms of the equipment that's actually the root cause of some of these issues. So I guess for us in the centre, this is all that context. These drivers were from the discussions we were having with industry, what arrived at the focus for a centre around the formation and control of particles and continuous operation, being able to create some enabling capability and technologies for industry in meeting some of its goals. So these are some generic considerations in terms of sustainable continuous processing. I've highlighted in bold, so minimising waste, minimising energy, minimising off-quality product. Those are probably the areas that we're most directly engaged with within the technical programme at the moment. Some activities starting to extend beyond that. But again, I'd be interested in hearing views from colleagues here in terms of where can we do more, how can we do this better. So there's a sort of timeline emerging from moving from the current manufacturing processes, how can we improve on that to deliver more consistent particles, reduce variability between batches by operating at a controlled steady state in a continuous process. Can we then start to get better particles, reduce the tolerance on our specifications, reduce the need for additional operations such as milling to control particle size. And also then can we start to, as we get better understanding of the capabilities of these technologies, deliver better function in our particles. So really just next few slides I've got some examples of some of the technical aspects ongoing in the research programme within CMAC, just trying to highlight some of the generic challenges and some of the areas where we're making progress. For continuous processing compared with batch, there's the need certainly in development to build up a greater picture of process understanding, a more detailed view of the kinetic transformations and key rate processes that are going on. So there's a significant interest in how we can deploy in situ measurement process analytical technologies, or PAT, for process understanding and control. On the left here, you just see a range of different spectroscopic and light scattering probes to look at solution concentrations, particle sizing in situ. And these are all attached to a continuous crystallization platform. We've colleagues at Strathclyde University and Loughborough University were successful in winning one of the EPSRC ICT programme awards last year for intelligent decision support for continuous manufacturing crystallization. So there's a team of researchers who are looking at how these existing sensors that are commercially available, how can we get more useful information from the signals that they are providing. So again, looking at building the portfolio of activity around the core centre programme. I think also, you know, building on this theme of partnership, which I'm sure when we welcome you up to the National Manufacturing the Future Conference next year, next week. I think it's next week, isn't it? In Glasgow, that we happen to be hosting, and I should know the date intimately. You know, we will still be talking about partnership, but from a national perspective rather than an international one. But within the centre, with the range of technology companies that we work with, this need to identify ways to develop process understanding quickly, a systematic approach to characterise the system and understand the operating space that we need to work within to deliver the continuous processes. We've worked with a number of companies to deliver this. This is actually a batch crystallizer unit, but integrated with multiple PAT probes to essentially allow us to do automated DOE, or design of experiments, to gather that information in a short-term automated approach. This chart here just showing at the end of this, the system is able to crystallize the material in solution under defined conditions of supersaturation. So we can dial in the conditions, the driving force for subsequent particle growth. And again, with the centres allowed us to do that by bringing the multiple stakeholders together and capturing that expertise in a focused way. In terms of some of our academic partners, so Chris Riley and colleagues at Loughborough University, so this is a crystallisation process informatics platform that again is aiming to deliver similar capability, a suite of process analytical tools so that we can monitor crystallisations, vary the conditions and understand the response to the system. At Loughborough is a big interest in developing first principles physical models for complex crystallisation processes. So as those models are being developed, delivering the infrastructure to allow us to test the deployment of that against our stated targets, better particles, novel functionality. Also, one of the challenges, one of the appealing things about batch technologies is that it's a reasonably forgiving technology. Things go wrong, you can dilute, you can heat redissolve. In continuous, you need quite a supply of material at the scales that we are typically operating at for crystallization. Very small channels and particles can be a bad marriage. Particle blocks, channel, process completed. But scaling down so that we can again get the information from the minimal amount of material. So again, this is more work at Loughborough. Mesoscale, continuous, these are plug flow reactors, characterizing the performance of the reactor. So again, we can develop crystallizations at small scale and get over some of the barriers in batch about rapid scale up to meet demands, potentially unknown demands for product development, where you go through clinical trials, the project may die completely or may actually scale up to a large patient population or a smaller, more niche patient population. For manufacturing, going back to the initial slide, the introductory statements from the MIT CMAC seminar, is the current manufacturing infrastructure in pharma actually fit for purpose for the upcoming needs? So again, colleagues at Strathclyde looking at developing new approaches for continuous generation of seed particles. This is essentially a precipitation process, but we need to tightly define and control the initial particles formed so that we can then grow those to the required attributes. We have a TSB-funded collaborative R&D project, or Innovate UK project, I should say, looking to implement model predictive control systems. These are data-driven empirical models around a continuous crystallization platform from Cambridge Reactor Design. These plots on the left-hand side, we have a commercially, so this is a stirred tank reactor, so a batch process, an optimized batch process. That's a particle size distribution, so you see the mean round about 100 micron, but a very broad spread. For pharmaceutical applications, you're often looking for very specific size ranges. So of that product, you then sieve it and take specific fractions. What we are starting to be able to get towards is a much more selective approach so that all of the product meets the requirements of the intended application. So again, in terms of getting the right product first time, starting to be able to demonstrate how continuous can contribute to that agenda. In terms of novel materials as well, so this is another example. So the yellow tubes here, again, these oscillatory baffled reactors, plug flow reactors that we're using for crystallization. And the SEM image here just showing some of the particles produced. This is a novel organic material that overcomes thermal instability in lipoic acid, but using continuous processes to deliver consistent products with enhanced properties over the starting materials. I mentioned in the scope at the outset that we also have an interest beyond just the crystallization step. So what are the influences of upstream processes, synthetic steps, variations and impurities? Those can have dramatic effects on the rate processes controlling crystallization. But also the particles that we produce ultimately need to be transferred or translated into dosage forms, tablets, creams, capsules, injections, something that we can take or administer to patients to deliver therapeutic effect. This is an example from colleagues at Strathclyde looking at hot melt extrusion processes where we're taking the crystals. So on the left-hand side you have a diffraction pattern showing the ordered structure of the particles, and hot melt extruding that with polymer to give us a molecular dispersion that's actually delivering enhanced dissolution performance across the range of pHs you'd encounter in the gastrointestinal tract. So the consequence, the plot on the right, just shows the difference in total dissolution obtained from the raw crystalline material with how we can change the performance of the material by using extrusion with a polymer to get significantly greater release. So the consequence of that is of the dose administered to the patient, a greater amount is available for absorption, less excreted directly into the environment as well. We have an interest not just in pharma, we have a massive focus in pharmaceuticals, but again, a range of other high-value chemical industries. This is some work from colleagues at Edinburgh University in the centre, where understanding the crystallisation process allows you to deliver better control over these melt cast explosives. So these are energetic materials. They're highly polymorphic. They're filling essentially the munitions with the molten material, but over time those transform, they crack. That impacts on the detonation kinetics, their stability, the safety of operation as well. So that's actually already been implemented in terms of changes in the commercial manufacturing process. In terms of engaging with the supply chain challenges, this is work led by IFM, Bajag Srai, and colleagues. Looking at the drivers and opportunities, I had the slide at the outset. You know, there are a whole range of expectations for continuous. Continuous is nothing new in oil and gas, for example. But how does it apply in the pharmaceutical context? Highly regulated, different demands, a very different way of currently working. So we need quantitative analytical frameworks to allow us to assess different configurations and test and model that. I think moving forward, again, last year successful, well, it was actually earlier this year, in securing one of the Advanced Manufacturing Supply Chain Initiative awards. This is Project Remedies, which is reconfiguring medicine's end-to-end supply chain, if I remember how we've arrived at that acronym. But that's a new program led by GSK, and we'll be looking to develop and build on some of the emergent work from the centre. In terms of technical highlights, a big focus on process crystallisation, chemicals doing their thing and how we monitor and play about with that. But how do we exploit ICT? Steve mentioned later on today hearing more about the role of data management, big data, so on. So within our space we have a distributed centre, geographic distribution of researchers. We've implemented in our doctoral training centre an electronic lab notebook, but also through the ICT programme looking at automated workflows around that, so that every researcher benefits from the development of methodologies and tools that are happening across the centre. So this has been rolled out last year, the automated workflow part. So when a student comes up or a researcher in the lab, they are guided through the development process for continuous crystallisation. They can invent or develop their own unique experiments if they need to. But in terms of a systematic approach, it allows us to really obtain some significant advantages from a centre point of view in building up that knowledge base. And these statements here are all from, this is the supplier of the software we are using for our ELN, but just some of the current pharmaceutical industry users of that system, talking about time saving, document preparation, reduction in the number of experiments that need to be cloned simply because, you know, archaic technologies, pen and paper, often don't make it through the archival process as you would hope. So to end in reasonable time, hopefully that's given you a sort of flavour of the sort of things we're doing in the centre and why we're trying to do it. Significant challenges industry faces. Some of our industry colleagues, when they say this, they often recognise pharmaceutical industry perhaps doesn't have the greatest, you know, sympathy vote from the wider population. But they are, any of us fall ill, our family fall ill, we need medicines. And we need new medicines and we need them available as and when we want them. So critical aspect to manufacturing, very important to the UK economy, and it's going to be important that they are better equipped to engage with and adopt novel manufacturing technologies moving forward. Particles offer a key technical challenge. These are complex multi-phase processes. There are a host of existing technologies and capabilities in that space. There's a real need for basic research and also take some of the emerging capabilities and how do we translate that into to the point that they can be adopted within a GMP regulated environment. I think the broader plea or request from myself is how or what are the tools and how perhaps can people in this room help us to consider sustainability more explicitly at the outset of the process development. So see, we're looking for consistency, for quality, reduced wastage by getting on-spec product all of the time. But how do we look at that, not just from product and process, from a systems level, whole life cycle analysis, I guess what are the decision support tools that we can start adopting? And I guess that's a test for this community in terms of how to deliver and embed those capabilities more broadly. Again, good technologies, few good PhD theses, some great papers, some happy industrial partners are one thing. We will get nowhere unless we engage with regulation, the regulatory agencies, FDA in the US, European Medicines Agency here in the UK. We're actively doing that, but there is a journey there that needs to carry on. And as I've mentioned, the importance of the supply chain. The current end-to-end cycle time from receipt of raw materials to packaged medicines being available to a patient can be a couple of years for some products, and that's with a footprint, carbon footprint that involves transportation around the world. If you reduce that cycle time using integrated end-to-end continuous processing to 10 days or 20 days, the current supply chain just is not configured to cope or adopt and manage that. So big challenges there. So just like to end, too many people to list who've contributed just some of the work that I've shown there. Obviously all of our industry partners and sponsors as well, and to you for your attention.